Hello, and welcome to Hot Summer Topic number 6, Literacy Improvement Teams. My name is Thomas Merritt, and I serve as a K-3 literacy consultant for NCDPI. Today we will be looking at the structures and practices which drive the implementation of successful literacy instruction for our students. These implementation frameworks are the pillars of foundational planning for student and school success. Why do we need to consider literacy improvement teams? It's important that we are mindful of some overarching questions surrounding how we do our business. Is what we are currently doing working for our students? Do we have a literacy school improvement team? Do we have a defined plan for literacy instruction? Do we know what our teachers and leaders know and what they should know? What are the benefits and obstacles to implementing change? How do we implement the change and measure effectiveness? No policy change or new program can be effective unless we can identify the needs of our school, and nothing will change unless we evolve our thinking towards a model of reflection and continuous improvement. Data is the benchmark for all planning and instruction. In North Carolina, third grade ELA scores have remained near 60% with a slight downturn over the last 6 years. Data will be even more crucial this year after the prior school year ended prematurely and students missed out on months of face-to-face learning along with missing their end-of-year assessments. How we use this data to inform instruction will be pivotal in our students' success this year. About 50,000 third grade students don't achieve proficiency on the reading EOG yearly. We can all agree that this number is way too high. So the question is, do we have structured steps in place to improve outcomes for students, to provide evidence-based training for teachers and leaders, and to monitor and adjust policies and practices surrounding literacy? If you answered no, this is the opportunity to explore how to get started improving literacy instruction. If you answered yes, this is the opportunity to see how tight your literacy policies, processes, and protocols really are. The first step in improving literacy instruction is to understand where we are, how we got there, where we want to go, and the correct path to get where we need our students and schools to be. Literacy School Improvement Team should not be confused with your standard school improvement team. The School Improvement Team deals with a variety of issues, including policy, budget, scheduling, and everything else that comes up. The Literacy School Improvement Team is a separate entity with the primary purpose of aligning literacy goals to instructional practices. Why are these teams important? A quote attributed to Ben Franklin sums it up very well. If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail. Literacy plans, at a minimum, should include information about the topics listed here. These focal points can guide thinking and planning around literacy goals. These points should be detailed and explicit, including who's responsible for what, by when, and how we will move towards implementation. One often overlooked aspect of school literacy planning is scheduling and staffing. These are the two most important aspects of implementation because without these in place, every other aspect of the plan is meaningless. The schedule must allow for a minimum of 90 minutes of uninterrupted reading instruction and enough staff to implement the school's plan. Over the past decades, the science related to developing and identifying evidence-based programs and practices has improved significantly. However, the science related to implementing these programs with high fidelity in real-world settings has lagged far behind. Recent reports from groups such as the Institute of Medicine and the U.S. Department of Education have highlighted the gap between researcher knowledge of effective innovations and the services actually received by persons who could benefit from research-based interventions. In fact, the lag time for translating research into practice has been documented as 20+ years. The research to practice gap is a critical issue because students cannot benefit from interventions they do not receive. If we know what works to teach students to read, It is our responsibility to make sure that we deliver what works during literacy instruction. In 2005, the National Implementation Research Network released a monograph synthesizing implementation research findings across a range of fields. Based on these findings, NERN developed 5 overarching frameworks referred to as the Active Implementation Frameworks. We can think of usable innovations as an evidence-based practice in literacy. The following criteria need to be in place to ensure that your evidence-based practice is usable. Clear description of the program. Clear essential functions that define the program. Operational definitions of essential functions. Practical performance assessment. The hexagon tool shown here can be used to assist in implementation planning. It provides for examination of 2 types of indicators, implementing site indicators and program indicators. Implementing site indicators include the capacity element, the fit with current initiatives, and the need of the site. Program indicators include evidence, usability, and supports. Implementation is a process involving multiple decisions, actions, and corrections to change the structures and conditions necessary to successfully implement and sustain new programs and innovations. There are 4 functional implementation stages. Notice that each stage of implementation does not cleanly end as another begins. Often, stages overlap with activities related to one stage still occurring as activities related to the next stage begin. Likewise, stages may be revisited when circumstances change. It's important not to skip exploration. Even with the urgency of improving literacy outcomes, identifying readiness for the change is integral to successful implementation. Implementation drivers are based on common features that exist among many successfully implemented programs and practices. The structural components and activities that make up each implementation driver contribute to the successful and sustainable implementation of programs and innovations. There are 2 types of implementation drivers. Competency drivers, which focus on supporting the skills and knowledge of the people using evidence-based practices. Organization drivers, which focus on supporting the environment and system using evidence-based practices. And leadership, although not a driver, strong leadership is necessary to fully support implementation across drivers and identify barriers. Implementation teams provide an internal support structure to move selected programs and innovations through the stages of implementation. Implementation teams focus on increasing buy-in and readiness, installing and sustaining the implementation infrastructure, assessing and reporting on fidelity and outcomes, building linkages with external systems, and problem-solving and promoting sustainability. Plan, Do, Study, Act, or PDSA cycles are fundamental to the work of implementation teams with the intentional use of data for decision-making. Implementation teams use PDSA cycles to help them make meaningful changes, alleviate barriers, and achieve expected outcomes. Many of us engage informally in these cycles as we think through and test out hypotheses or go about improving our work and lives. We often start by getting clear about what we want to do. Then we make a plan, engage in behavior as planned, evaluate how effective our behavior was. Then we make more plans based on how well we did. In a team setting, these roles and functions may be performed by different team members. Thinking about a current or upcoming initiative, how could you better utilize improvement cycles in your work? How can formal, transparent, and regular methods for hearing from the practice level and then moving information up the system and back down support effective implementation of new programs and innovations? What are the challenges to developing such processes? And what might facilitate developing these practice policy communication cycles? Review the following statements. Which set best describes you? Which set least describes you? What type of person or persons might you need to partner with to work through an entire Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle? And what skills might you improve on? After completing the individual activity, go through this activity from a team perspective. Which set best describes your team? Which set least describes your team? Are there any gaps that need to be filled on the team? Once we know about ourselves, we can analyze current team skill levels and areas that we may need to improve upon. We may then begin to think about staff members who can fill crucial roles in our literacy improvement teams. Thank you for joining us today. For additional information or to learn more about implementation science, you can visit the NERN website. There you will find modules, lessons, and short courses, and a resource library which will provide you information about best practices in implementation. Also, for information about Read to Achieve and resources for literacy, please visit the RTA Reading Repository.